Welcome to Pure Energy Connections here at the People's Patriot Network. Pure Energy Connections is where we connect, we share ideas, we heal, we manifest our dreams. This is a place where I believe, my passion is preventive health. Preventive health is in all different areas of our life. You know, it could be the food we grow or the food we purchase. It could go all the way down to living chemical free, learning to sustain yourself on, learning things such as herbology and learning different avenues as far as taking care of yourself, certain herbs and supplements that you take. So bringing awareness of what we can do to improve the quality of our life and our environment. Very, very important, folks. Well, this is our Thursday night show. And on our Thursday nights now, we are so blessed to have a wonderful guest on our show. I'm going to do the disclaimer first, but we have Jim Kurtz coming up next. It'll be just a moment, right after the disclaimer. The information, services, devices, and products shown on this website and emails, newsletters, and radio show have not been evaluated by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and or any other governmental derivatives thereof, known or unknown. These statements, services, products, and devices have not been approved by the FDA and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any illness or disease and are not to serve as medical advice. I do not heal anyone, as the body has innate abilities to heal if you give it what it needs, such as the balance of energy, organic food, and I am not a physician, dietitian, nutritional expert, nor a scientist, physicist, or pastry chef, and those seeking treatment for specific disease, pain, or illness should consult a qualified, competent, integrative physician prior to using any of our products, services, or information herein. So thank you, folks. Thank you for being here today. Pure Energy Connections, People's Patriot Network. Jim Kurtz is the Executive Director of Organic Earth Tech. And what an incredible product he has, because we're always looking for something. You know, and there's Jim right now. You know, Jim, we're always looking for something that can help us in our gardening, even if we're just a small gardener or a large gardener, something that can help with the pests, can help with soil erosion, help our plants grow stronger and more nutritionally dense. So we're all looking for those things, and this 100% organic device that Jim has, and we're going to be talking about again today, is just phenomenal. Jim, are you there?
I'm here.
Yeah, great. I am so excited because we're going to touch on, I know we were talking last week, and I'm so happy you're here every Thursday night and every Friday. This is Eastern time, folks, Eastern time, but it's every Thursday night at 10 p.m. and every Friday at 2 p.m. is the replay. So, Jim, what are we going to be discussing today about our gardening and to help the farmers and gardeners out there?
Well, I thought today we could talk a little bit about what's bugging you. You know, it's kind of like the title. And by
Good.
bugging, I don't mean, what's annoying you necessarily, but the pests, insects, the things that creepy crawlies and whatever that get into your garden and sometimes destroy or make your work much harder in terms of growing your own vegetables or fruits or just plants, flowers, etc. So, um, you know, if you want to be an organic gardener or organic farmer and grow without using chemicals and pesticides and that kind of thing, obviously the big challenge is how do you keep the other natural organisms, namely insects, diseases, bacterias, um, mollusks like snails and slugs, and other creepy crawlies away from the plants because that's their food source too. And but you can't always compete for the food with these little guys. There's a lot more of them than there are of us. So I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about how plants have their own defense mechanisms and how that can sometimes get short circuited, as well as what you can do to restore that in your plants so that you don't have to use chemicals. The plants themselves will really help out and do the work for you.
And that's awesome, because the last thing we want to do is spray them with anything. I mean, we don't want to spray our homes, and we certainly don't want to spray our food. So, yeah, this is interesting. Very good.
Yeah. And point of fact, I did some research when I was doing a research book, an ebook, for us because in trying to describe the new technology that we've created and that and the device that we have, which uses that technology, I really was getting a lot of kind of puzzled looks, puzzled sounds, and I think mostly because people didn't have any context. They thought, well, well, who is this? And this is some fly by night thing. And it turns out there was about 100 years of research that went into communication to plants and playing music for plants, talking to your plants, singing to your plants, and just the effects of frequencies and communication on plant growth and plant yields. So in the midst of that research, I discovered there's been several research for the last 20, 30 years, and I'm sure before, that really went into the communication system of plants and how they communicate to each other, and how they interact with their environment, because it's a part of evolution that insects, while the insects go to eat the plants have their own mechanism to fight off those insects, because the plants want to survive also. So that research really kind of uh, gave me a lot of insight as far as how plants uh, evolve to sort of handle insect attacks, because plants are trying to survive just like insects are.
Yeah, how did they actually survive without us? I mean, here we have farming and everything going on with the pesticides, huge pesticides. We got the glyphosate and all the spraying. And, how did they do that back in, say, the 1700s or 1600s or even 1800s? And how did our forestry, grow so lavish and beautiful without us having chemicals put on them? I always thought about
Yeah,
that.
well, yeah. I mean, if you really think about it, the plants have been around on this planet much longer than humans. I mean, not to say that if you're a creationist and believe completely in the Adam and Eve story, that's fine. But the scientific consensus is that plants have been around for millions and millions of years, and humans have been around for maybe 30,000 years. But plants predate even most of the animals. So
Hmm.
um, the reality is the evolutionary process incorporates um, predator and prey, and this is for animals. It's true for animals and plants. In any living organism, pretty much any living organism, its goal, its basic goal, the most basic goal that it has is to survive, and it procreates or reproduces in order to continue its survival to next generations, because a particular plant or animal only lives a certain amount of time.
Hmm.
But through reproducing, whether it's through fruiting and seeds like a plant would, or by reproducing like with eggs or offspring in animals, by reproducing, they continue the next generation. Well, according to Darwin and the theory of evolution, um, organisms evolve certain traits to be able to survive better, so that it can reproduce and continue its genetic line into further generations. Because if certain traits were advantageous, then those animals would live longer, they would be able to reproduce, and the ones that didn't have positive traits would die before they get to reproduce. And just multiplied by billions and billions of times over multiple, thousands of generations of different species, you have an evolution where plants evolve certain mechanisms to, let's say, fight off an insect attack, and then the insects respond through that same process of evolution to counteract uh, those things that the plants are doing, so that they can continue to survive. And then the plants have to uh, evolve another trait that keeps it alive from insect attacks. Then the insects evolve and everything else. Um, and one of the problems that they're having with things like GMOs right now, especially in India and in other areas, is GMOs really became like a giant leap forward in that evolutionary process, where we really evolved plants, hundreds or maybe thousands of times faster than nature would. Um, but the problem with that is then insects then evolve hundreds of times faster as well to kind of keep up with that. So they're having problems with insects that are now resistant to, let's say, the Bt toxin or other types of genetic modifications. And really, we bought ourselves a little window of time by using GMOs, let's say in corn and soybeans and those things and cotton. But that window of time is going to close, where the thing that you're trying to prevent, like insect attacks or whatever you're trying to prevent with the genetic modifications, those things will evolve faster as well, become resistant to your toxins or whatever you're putting with the GMOs. And you're in the same boat, say 10, 20, 30 years later, but you bought yourself that 20-year window of time but then at the end of the day, you find yourself in the same boat. You have to then do even more radical techniques to further that evolutionary process.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Wow. So how does that work with I know the GMOs you were talking about, but what about the hybrids then? When you're talking about heirloom and hybrid, does that all still fall in the same categories?
Yeah, yeah, hybrid plants or hybrid plants. The difference between hybrids and GMOs are hybrids are basically where you take two species that are, let's say, genetically similar. Like maybe you take a red rose, let's say, and a white rose, and you try to breed them together to get, let's say, a red and white rose that has a different color pattern, for example. Or if you're doing, let's say, one type of, excuse me, one type of orange plant with maybe a tangerine. Those are very similar species that when you combine them together, maybe you develop a trait in that resulting fruit that allows it to be, let's say, more resistant to some chemical or more disease or something like that. Um, but the different with GMOs, you're not taking genetically similar species like two different varieties of oranges or varieties of citrus, let's say. You're taking a plant and you're splicing the genes with, let's say, a bacterium or a virus or something that's from a totally different genetic background and a different kingdom of life. Plants are one kingdom, animals are a kingdom, and then you have bacterium. Let's say they're a completely different kingdom in the living spectrum. So it's a completely different radical change as opposed to just hybridizing two different types of roses, for example. So the genetic similarity is really the difference between GMOs, let's say, and hybridization. Well, hybrids will do the same thing. If you're trying to say, well, tangerines aren't really susceptible to this type of bug, but oranges are. So if we hybrid a tangerine and an orange, maybe we'll get an orange that resists this type of bug. Um, it's the same kind of process, but because the species are similar, you tend to have less of the side effects, and it's less of a leap forward in some cases than a GMO would be. But the same thing will happen. Like the bugs will eventually either evolve to eat some different type of crop altogether, or they'll evolve with some kind of resistance or immunity to whatever the trait was that the hybrid plant gave it that allowed it to survive.
So we have to stay like two steps ahead of the bugs.
Yeah, I
Those,
mean it's a continual process, you know.
yeah, yeah. So the device that you have is spectacular because it really doesn't differentiate between these plants or anything. You can use it on all these plants, including grass, right?
Yeah, you can, and really what our product does, it doesn't necessarily change the fruit. Like you're not introducing a different type of species or a different type of um, even kingdom like you would with the GMO. You're not actually changing the plant or changing the fruit in any way. What you're doing is you're just making the plant very, very healthy in and of itself. So, um, for example, just take a tomato plant, right? If you have a tomato plant, let's say that's wilting and not doing very well. I'll give you an example. One of the farmers that used our product. So he started his tomatoes early in the season, and he had a cold spell come through where it was very dark, didn't get very good light levels. It was very cold, colder than the plants could really tolerate easily. And what happened was the plants kind of shriveled up, and they weren't able to tolerate that difference in environment. And the plants that just had regular water ended up dying because they got a fungus. And fungus came in, and the plants that didn't have our device got an infection because of the low light levels and the bad temperature. They weren't strong enough to withstand that attack by that external fungus, that organism that came in and basically killed the plant. Our device was able to keep the plants healthy enough despite the low light levels and the low temperature, that the plant was healthy enough to fight off that fungal infection. And yeah, a couple of the plants did die as well, but we saved probably 90% of his crop because the plant itself was healthier. It wasn't like we evolved that tomato plant to be more resistant to a fungus, or it was that the plant itself was just healthy enough to fight off that infection. And the same thing would apply to human beings too, right? If you're really healthy, you'll fight off a flu infection, let's say a flu virus. Somebody else can come around sneezing, coughing all over you, although that's kind of gross. But let's say a coworker or something, or a kid comes in and starts coughing, and you get some of that mucus or whatever on you, you're not going to get sick if you're healthy and you're doing well and everything else. Whereas if you're under stress and you're not eating as healthy as you should, or maybe your body's just not as healthy as it otherwise could be, you get that same exposure, and now all of a sudden you'll get a full blown flu, and you'll get very sick. So the difference is that the healthier you are, or the healthier a plant is, the better able it is to withstand those environmental pressures, including predators like insects or fungus or other things that would destroy the plant.
That makes sense now. What happened to my basil plant that I was telling you about? When we had that really bad freeze here, if anyone listened to our show prior to, when I told you the compost came up in 3 weeks, and by the way, that tomato plant is probably a good, 2.5, about 2.5 feet tall, if not taller. But I lost all my Thai basil. I have a lot of herbs that I like to cook with, and that's probably what happened with that, because when it froze, I continued watering it, with your technology, and just praying and hoping it would come back. And then all of a sudden, I now have 3 pots full of Thai basil, and they came out of nowhere. They were just probably dormant in the dirt or whatever, but your technology just brought it back to life. They're now about almost 2 feet tall. I'll send you a picture of it just so you can see. But it's
Yeah, I'd love to
amazing.
see that.
Yeah, and I thought for sure I lost them all. In fact, I was looking around to buy some more Thai basil because I cook a lot of Thai food. And I was like, oh, I got to get more Thai basil. And all of a sudden, here they are. They're shooting up all over the place. Of course, I water every day, just a little bit with the technology. Just even if it rained out, I'll even go out there once in a while and just to do a light water, just so they get the technology that day.
Yeah, there is a point of no return. I mean, just like with anything, if the plants get too bad, even with our technology, if it's, let's say, if you go down, if a plant's supposed to be in full sun in Florida heat, and all of a sudden you put it in Vermont cold and give it a shock, then yeah, it could. If an environmental shock is too much, then nothing's going to save it. You know what I mean? Um, so there's a point of no return with that. Same thing with insect attacks and other stuff. Um, but it's better to try to make the existing plants as healthy as possible and let nature take its course, rather than trying to jump the evolutionary chain forward, buy yourself some time, only
Mm.
to understand that first of all, we don't really know what these huge leaps forward are doing to us as we consume the plants. But even if you discount that, eventually you're going to develop superbugs. In fact, you've probably already heard many times over the last 10, 20 years of now there's like super flu viruses running around because of all the antibiotics that we were using back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. We were just using antibiotics for everything. Well, what happened is the flu viruses um, had to evolve these super immunities to these antibiotics and become like these super bugs that are now killing. You hear in the news all the time about, oh, it's H1N1 or this pig swine flu, bird flu, all these flus that are going around killing people that are super heavy strains of flu. Well, these weren't around back, I mean, 10, 20, 30 years ago. And the reason they're around now is because we've tried to jump the evolutionary chain with these antibiotics, and now eventually 20, 30 years later, you have the flus and the bacteriums are resistant to those types of antibiotics, or those types of um, medicines that were effective 20, 30 years ago. Now they're not effective. Now the scientists are scrambling around trying to find out what the next big thing is. So
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I do two things. I do mind over matter, of course. I always just say I'm invincible and I'll never get sick. So I don't get sick unless I eat something really bad. And I do take chlorella. I have an organic liquid chlorella and I put it in water and I do drink that daily. And of course, eating really good. Eating a lot of the food that I grow and eating totally non-GMO, organic as much as possible. I try never to eat out at a restaurant. God knows what you get there, and if I do, I pay for it. you know. So yeah, it's trying to keep the immune system as strong as possible, so we don't get in that predicament where we have to have anything penicillin antibiotics. I mean, that's the last thing you want to put in your body if you can help it. I mean, I know
yeah,
there's reasons we need it, and I know that, but but gosh, I haven't been to a doctor since I don't know when. I can't even remember the last time But it's all about just it's mind over matter. It's knowing that you're strong. It's knowing that you're doing the right thing. You're eating well. You're taking the right supplements. You're right. Well, so for the
Yeah.
plants, yeah, the plants now, where are they getting this information to be so healthy? How's that working? Because my plants are just phenomenal, and I try to explain it to people, that come by and see my plants. Yeah, they're like, "How are you doing this, DJ?"
Well, and the explanation part, people always want me to explain it, and I kind of lose people. But I think it's very simple. Um, if you imagine, like, if you hear a song you really like, or maybe you like, let's say hypothetically, you like Mozart, and all of a sudden you hear a Mozart song, and it will actually affect you on a physical level. It's yeah, of course you like the music, and mentally and spiritually, maybe even you're uplifted, and you're like, yeah, I love this song. But like really physically, on a physical level, your cells, you'll just start to feel better sometimes when you hear a really happy piece of music or something like that. And yet, if you hear, let's say, somebody rake their nails down a chalkboard, for example, you can not like that sound or like it or don't care about it, but it produces a physical reaction, like in your cells, like you actually kind of cringe, and you know, it's almost like an automatic response. Well, the reason why you have that reaction is because at the cell level, your cells are responding to something, and those frequencies of sound, in this case, are actually causing a cellular reaction. They actually cause your cells to sort of tense up, or if it's a happy piece of music or something, they cause your cells to sort of operate and get into the groove of what they're supposed to do. Well, what Fulvio, the inventor of this technology, discovered is there are very specific frequencies that affect very specific systems in a plant, for example. So the systems of photosynthesis are um, are a very specific process, and the cells that handle photosynthesis in a plant give off a frequency signature that can be measured by a machine that he has. And this machine measures those exact frequency patterns that a healthy plant that's doing well, that's vibrant, that's producing lots of fruit, that's in its natural environment without pollutants and that kind of stuff, that's just really doing well. They have a very specific frequency pattern that can be measured and recorded. And then when you look at a plant, let's say that's not doing well, that has been subjected to a lot of pollution, or maybe has been subjected to insect attacks, or maybe is not getting the nutrients in the soil, or is not watered properly, not getting enough light, whatever is going on with that plant, there'll be very specific changes to that frequency pattern in that plant, which Fulvio Baumelli, the inventor of this device, actually measured. He measured when a plant was not getting enough light. He measured when a plant was not getting, let's say, enough nitrogen in the soil, or enough potassium, or enough water, or maybe it's getting too much water, and he was able to measure those differences. And he systematically discovered, okay, if I have a plant, if I introduce this frequency to a plant that's having, let's say, low light issues, then the cells in the plant will respond as if all of a sudden the plant got enough sunlight. Or if I do this other frequency and introduce this frequency to a plant that was getting not enough water, let's say, then the cells in the plant will respond as if, boom, you just watered your plant. Or if it's not getting enough nitrogen, um, there would be a certain frequency pattern, and then all of a sudden the plant will respond. And he did this over and over and over again, and he created 2,200 specific frequencies that basically are communicated to the plant. And when the plant, gets exposed to the frequency that indicates whatever problem it's having, the plant will respond and go back to its optimum function. And if a certain signal, if the plant's, let's say, the signal relating to water, um, but the plant's not having a problem with water, that signal will just be sort of ignored. Just like if you're listening for a certain type of sound, a mother's really good at this, right? A mother will hear their baby sound and can pick out their baby's sound versus, in a whole room of crying babies, they can go right to where their baby is, right? They know that exact sound and that exact pattern. And the same thing with the plant, if If it's not having a problem, that frequency will be ignored. But if it is having that problem, the plant will respond to that frequency, and it will start to behave more optimally. Now, that
Hmm.
may be a little bit technical, but that's really what's going on with our device. It's really just like it's almost like you're asking a series of questions to a human being, like a doctor. You go to a doctor and say, "Hey, I don't feel so good," and the doctor will start asking you questions. Okay, is it your head? No. Is it your stomach? No. Is it your knee? Yeah, my knee hurts. Okay, good. Now, and he knows your body well enough to know. Okay, good. So, is it just your knee, or is it also your hip? And you'll say, "Oh, it's my hip too." And you go, "Okay, so it's your hip." And then they go, "Okay, now, is it your knee, hip? Is it also in your left shoulder or and your right hip or just your right hip? Hey, my left shoulder is hurting a lot. And the only reason the doctor knows to ask these questions is the doctor knows what systems are connected to each other. And then he'll go, okay, this is what you need. We need to, let's say, readjust your spine, or I need to hit this pressure point or whatever. And then it handles the whole system. Well, plant physiology is different than humans, but it works on the same principles because all living things have this kind of thing. If you just start asking the plant the right questions, and you can do that through very specific types of signals, the plant will respond when the signal that indicates whatever is wrong with the plant, you know, and it will improve.
No, that's very well put. It's because that makes it easier to understand what Fulvio's done as far as the frequencies and the sound waves, and giving the plant, of course, what the plant wants to hear to thrive, basically. And it's funny you mentioned about the mother. I could be clear across the house, and my 19-year-old dog, and he could make just a little whimper, and I'll hear it. I mean, it's the sound waves that we attune to. And yeah, I guess, and like you were saying, it's kind of the difference between Mozart and Led Zeppelin, but it's definitely helping the plants. I know that. I have a whole garden front and back of the house is just thriving, and they obviously like it. And I think I told you this before. I let a day or two go one time when it was raining, and I thought, they're getting plenty of good water, right? And they just didn't look as happy. I mean, they were fine, but they just didn't. As soon as I went back and then used your technology, just wrapped it around the spigot that came out, and boom. Of course, what I do is, I let all the bad water come out of the hose first. I have a 100-foot hose, but yeah, and then all of a sudden, I mean, within 5 minutes, they just start looking. They look at me like, "Thank you." it's, you
Thanks,
know,
mom. Thanks.
yeah, yeah. I just like to wet the leaves with it, and I think, and that's probably
Yeah.
plenty too, right? Just wetting the leaves with your technology.
Well, it's better if it comes up through the root system because that's the plant's natural way of absorbing water.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes what I do if I'm watering in the morning or the evening, I'll just give kind of a quick spray to the leaves too.
Mm-hmm.
But the primary way that a plant will actually absorb water is through the root system.
Right.
Um, and sometimes, the plants have little holes in their leaves. They're called stomata, and that's actually how carbon dioxide from the air is absorbed by the plant when it's using photosynthesis.
Mm.
So the water can kind of trickle in sometimes through that way, but not always, depending on you know how thick the water is or how heavy the molecules are condensed. But um, most of it will come through the root system anyway. So I just say water the soil. If you want to spray the leaves, just don't do it in the middle of the afternoon sun because the stomata in the plant are open during sunlight because that's when photosynthesis is happening. And if it gets too much water through the leaves, it can actually burn. We call it burning the leaves, where
Mm.
it can actually damage the plant.
So don't
If you
water.
do it in the evening, or morning, it's less of a problem because that's not the point of sunlight where the plant is wide open to, let's say, photosynthesis. So it's not as big of an issue.
Okay. Well, I'm doing good then, because I usually that's the first thing I do is I water in the morning, or sometimes a little bit in the evening too if they look dry. But I noticed the reason I mentioned that was I noticed the ones that my hose reaches that get water on the leaves are doing better than the ones that are on the side of the house that I physically have to use your device and put it in a little bucket and then go and water them, and they never get it on their leaves. So I was
Yeah.
wondering if that, but so that probably doesn't have anything to do with it. It's just probably the location of them then.
Not to my knowledge. I mean, I guess it could have a difference, but not to my knowledge. I don't think it would be a big difference.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was put very well, though, Jim. Oh my gosh! I mean, to try to explain this to people when they come by and see my garden thriving, and I'm kind of lost. I'm like, well, it's information that the plant wants to hear through sound waves, and they just look at me like I'm crazy, you know.
Well,
But
yeah, I get this sounds like Star Trek kind of a thing. That's the biggest joke that people say,
yeah,
And I'm like, well, really, and what I tell people is, look, if you were back in the 70s or even the 60s or 70s and you start talking to a farmer about GMOs and what you're doing, what the actual process is, like, hey, we're taking the individual genetic code, the DNA inside the cells of a plant, and we're introducing a bacterium into the genetic code of a plant, and that bacteria is actually giving the cells of this plant the ability to resist insect damage. I mean, they're going to look at you like you're out of your mind, like you're an alien with five heads, But now, 30, 40 years later, that everybody's using it, it's become an accepted thing. People still may not get the whole process of how it works, but they just accept it because it's everywhere. And that's probably what's going to ultimately happen with my stuff. I'm going to get a lot of resistance initially, a lot of misunderstanding, but then as more and more evidence comes to light, as more and more trials get done, and more proof happens, and then more people start using it with a lot of the testimonials and stuff, it won't be such a strange thing. It'll be more like, oh, well, because people don't really need to know how it works. They just know that it works, right? You don't know when you pick up your cell phone, you don't know all the circuitry inside that thing inside your, that you're holding on to. You don't know the signals that are coming off of it. You don't know all the different cell towers on that whole network, and how that signal gets transmitted across the country to a friend of yours, and how it gets retranslated into your voice. Nobody understands how that whole process works, but everybody has a cell phone. Everybody's using a cell phone, right? Um, so that's probably ultimately what's going to happen with my device. Enough people just start using it and they start seeing the results. Um, then it's going to say, a lot of people will start saying, well, I don't know how it works, but I just know, look at my tomatoes, it works. And then people start using it, and then more and more information will come out and just trickle through, and people will say, well, of course the frequencies is the way to go. Of course this is the way to help the health of a plant. Why would you use toxic stuff when this thing will have the same result without all the side effects?
definitely. Well, I was drawn to you guys and introduced to you just because the lady that introduced me to you knew that I was, working with energy for, oh my gosh, over half my lifetime, and knew about it when I was 4 years old, and I see it. So yeah, as soon as I heard what you were doing and what Falvia was doing in Italy, I says, "Oh my gosh, I have to be part of that." You know,
Yeah.
yeah, because it either resonates with you or you don't understand it, but it doesn't matter either or. Like you said, as soon as you start seeing the results, and just like the tomatoes and the green peppers I have growing right now, strong and hardy. I've never seen them look so healthy before. They're just amazing.
Yeah, and the cool thing is, like, every type of plant has their own way of fighting off insects or predators, right? So some develop like spines on their leaves and the branches to prevent insects from sort of landing on them or eating them. Others have certain biochemical changes that when they are exposed to an insect attack, they'll actually change the biochemical structure in their plant. They'll send certain chemicals into the leaves, which either kill the insects or otherwise um, maybe create a bad taste for the insects, let's say, or maybe make it hard to digest the leaf material for the insects. And then the insects, what happens with that is the insects actually don't a lot of times die from the plant's own natural defenses. The insects will go to weaker plants. So if you've got let's say if you've got a garden full of tomato plants, for example, and all of a sudden you get, these fruit flies come in and start eating the leaves. The plants, if they're healthy, will change their own. Will send a chemical, let's say, into the leaves, and then the insects will stop attacking those tomato plants in your garden. Well, what happens to the insects? Well, they go to your neighbor's garden and they'll start eating those tomato plants until their tomato plants have the same reaction, and then they'll go to somewhere else. So it's not so much a matter of let's kill all the insects as much as it is, hey, let's just protect what we've got, and let the insects go somewhere else. And that makes my job easy in selling it because I sell a few farmers or a few gardeners, and they go, well, how come your plants aren't getting eaten by insects and mine are getting destroyed all of a sudden? It's like, well, I'm using this device, and unfortunately, all the bugs that were eating my plants are now eating yours. And then, of course, they call me and they, they order their device, and it makes my job easy. So, um, but that's the thing. And sometimes plants will have biochemical things that they shoot out pheromones into the air, which attract the predators of certain insects. Like, you have, say, birds that eat insects. Well, there's certain, let's say, pheromones that a plant might develop over time that attracts those birds to the plant. And then, of course, they see the insects eating the plant and they eat the insects. The plant is saved. It's very interesting how that whole process works on a natural level without the human interference of pesticides.
Yeah, definitely. I love when I see the bees around my herbs, especially the ones that flower, such as my Thai basil, because they're actually the Thai basil now is coming up in other pots, such as my avocado. Oh, by the way, I have an avocado for you too. I need to get that
Oh
over
yeah,
to you. Yeah,
you're
but
going to give me that tree, but
yeah,
uh,
the avocado tree. Well, I've got two. I've actually got one, two, three, four, five. I got seven of them now.
oh cool.
So yeah, yeah, and I need to find people that want to plant them. But yeah, I watch the bees back there, and they'll go and they'll pollinate on the top part of the Thai basil, that, and then they go someplace else. So now I'm seeing Thai basil coming out of the avocado plant, and they're just bringing it all over. It's just amazing. I love to watch how that all works.
Yeah, the community garden that I have my plot in, they actually just installed a bee pollinator. There's a couple of hives that they installed to the side of the garden where everybody's got their little plots, and I've noticed a big difference just in the last couple weeks since the bees were there. How much more my plants are flowering, how much more they're growing. So the plants definitely know when the bees are there, helping them out. And that's actually one of the things that people ask me because when I talk about my device, they say, well, how does that affect bees? And I say, well, if you spray a pesticide on a plant, it could kill the bee, right? Because a bee's an insect, and if it's susceptible to whatever chemical you're using, it could harm the bees and kill the bees. But when you're just enhancing the plant's um, natural health, then a plant doesn't see a bee as a predator or as an enemy. A plant sees a bee as something they want to attract. So their own natural mechanisms are not going to dissuade the bee from coming to their flowers. In fact, it's the opposite. So it becomes even more of a benefit for the bee population because um, it gives them obviously flowers that they can, the ability to get the nectar and stuff they need for their survival without harming the colonies or harming the bees. So you make the plant healthy, you get them to flower more, you help the bees as well, and you don't have to use chemicals to kill the destructive insects. So it's kind of a win-win.
That is awesome. I was going to ask you about that. Save the bees. Yeah. I mean, I see so many bees around my plants, so obviously they are drawn to the plant, definitely, and the plant loves it. Well, so all the other bugs that we were talking about before, going to our neighbor's house. I mean, that's pretty cool. I do like
Not cool
that.
for your neighbors, but
No, but that's when you walk over there and just say, "Hey, Merry Christmas. Here you go. Give them one."
yeah,
But
share the love.
yeah, share the love. But no, that's absolutely incredible, and I'm so glad you said that about the bees because a lot of people may think that they may think that it's, the bees are going to go elsewhere, but no, they love it. They're actually, I think they're drawn more to it when you're watering with this technology, and
Yeah,
it's just
because it's a symbiotic relationship. So obviously, the plants want the bees there because they need to pollinate their flowers. The bees want to be there for obvious reasons. So it works together as opposed to fighting the system. Sometimes it's hard to when you're trying to solve a problem. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm an enemy of GMOs or enemy of science and that kind of stuff. It's just that sometimes when you're trying to solve a particular problem, if you get too focused on the small problem that you're focused on, sometimes you don't look at the bigger picture and how a particular solution is going to affect the wider system. I think a lot of times when you're looking at, I want to, increase crop production and reduce the amount of loss due to insect damage on my crops. Sometimes the bigger picture is, well, how is this going to affect bees and pollination and other parts of the ecosystem that are part of this whole process? And sometimes that then you create your solution, you notice that there's, oh, this horrible side effect that you didn't anticipate, and now you have to scramble and figure out how to handle the side effect. And it's almost sometimes like you're chasing your tail. Um, so that's kind of a situation I think that we're really involved in with agriculture um, is trying to solve all the problems, but also take as wide a view as possible about the whole ecosystem of it, and and look at how a solution is going to affect the wider system. Is it going to create pollutants in our groundwater, and how does that affect an ecosystem? Or, is it going to kill the bees, which are beneficial, to agriculture and wildlife? Is it going to affect some other thing that maybe like a bird system, let's say, that feeds on insects? You get the insects away and kill them off. Well, now you've killed the bird's food supply. So maybe that has an impact on the bird population in an area. So um, I think scientists are becoming very, very much more keenly aware of the wider view of it, and especially with permaculture and sustainability concerns. And as that gets um, more and more play, and more uh, the awareness of that becomes greater. I think that also gives scientists the ability to look, okay, good. So we've got the solution. Let's test it out in the laboratory. Good. Now let's before we just go throw this all over the world, let's really take a look at what the potential impacts are in each ecosystem, and how that could affect things. And I think that awareness is getting more and more prevalent in the scientific community, as well as obviously in the organic and you know Mother Earth news and the naturalist kind of viewpoint.
Exactly. I wanted to mention too to the audience, I neglected earlier to mention that the website to check out this technology is farmerliaison.com. And what I'm going to do, Jim, too, is because I'm just so excited about my before and afters here, and I know I've texted you quite a few. I'm going to go ahead and create a page on my Co-Housing Gone Green site, which is basically was permaculture. We have permaculture in mind, of course. And I'm going to take one whole page and I'm going to start uploading my pictures. And what I'll do, folks, is I'm going to have a link at pureenergyconnections.com, and that link will be look for a tab. I'll probably put it in a new tab, and just go to that link, and that will show my before and afters, because I really want people to take a look at this. It's just amazing. Like I said, the grapevine, the one that you thought was just incredible, it was dead for at least six. Now I don't know dead, but or how far dead, but 6 months of just brittle. I mean, just didn't look like it was going anywhere. Ready to just chop it down. And for some reason, I started watering it. When was that? I don't remember when I sent that to you, about 2 months ago. And this thing is thriving. I mean, it's even better now than it was before. So I
Well,
have
yeah,
all these before and afters. Go ahead.
yeah. And vines tend to not really die very easily. Vines almost always go into a dormancy phase, especially in the wintertime. But at the point where you said you started watering, the vine should have already been having plenty of leaves, and should have already kind of come back to life, and out of hibernation, probably at least a month before it did, based upon the weather patterns of Florida. So it definitely wasn't doing very well before you started watering it, and I'm definitely happy to hear that our technology helped bring it back to life again.
Yeah, that was probably one of my best testimonials because it was not watered. We just thought it was dead. We just let it go. And I don't know, something
Yeah.
told me to start watering it. Yeah, and it didn't take long. I mean, a couple of weeks, or not even a couple of weeks, it was about a week. I saw this little green coming on the stems, and I said, no, there's no way.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's
We
there's
had a
some.
farmer. We had a farmer in Australia who was growing lettuce, and they ran into a drought, and he pretty much was giving up on his lettuce crop. And then this was 2 or 3 years ago. Um, and we said, well, I don't know if it's beyond the point of no return, but let's give it a shot. And so we let him use our technology, and it brought all of those lettuce crop back to life. So I think he saved probably 2 or 3 acres of lettuce, just by using our device. It was pretty cool.
Wow, that is incredible. Well, mine died, as you know, from the hurricane, and
Yeah.
because I had to leave, and then came back, and it was just a disaster here. But then we had the freeze, not too long, into our winter months, and yeah, it just never was even touched. So yeah, I understand what you mean about a vine, but it was, I mean, it looked dead as a doorknob, I tell you. So the lettuce all came back for that guy. That is incredible. So
Yeah.
this is, yeah, this is just amazing. I mean, it's we can't call it a, well, you do call it a miracle product.
Called Miracle Plants, and that
Yeah.
that name, I don't know. If your listeners are listening to this and they check out farmerliaison.com and you look through the information, you know, if everything looks good, but you just saying I don't know about that name, leave a comment or something. We're totally open to a better naming system than that. But to me, it was just like, well, we're really seeing miracles here. Um, so let's just call it miracle plants because that seems to be what's happening over and over again. So, um, but if other people have ingenious kind of idea, definitely let us know. We're open to changing it if it'll help get this technology out there.
Yeah, yeah. I think when they see, if they saw it in a store, for instance, which they won't, but if they see miracle plants, they may not realize right then and there what this technology is really doing, and being 100% organic. I mean, that is the best part.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's there's different ways to solve a problem. So this way, I was excited about because if you can just get the plants to be healthier without having to resort to a lot of chemicals or even fertilizers and just that to me has always been the hassle for gardening is like I've got 3 kids, I've got a full-time job, I'm always doing my thing, just to sit there and do soil tests and measure pH levels and try and figure out what elements and add different amendments like nitrogen or phosphorus or whatever. I just don't have the time to do that, and that's why I've never really gardened until about a year ago because it was just so hard. And I had the black thumb of death. I touch a plant and it dies. So, but now with this, I'm happy because even though I still don't take care of my garden as well as I should, I don't go there every day. It's with my busy schedule. If I make it to my garden a couple 3 times a week, I'm lucky. But I come back and the plants are still there, and they're still doing well. And I have an automatic watering system on my plot, so I don't have to necessarily be there every day. But I just do a little tending a couple times each week, and I've got a nice garden that's giving me some nice fruits.
Yes, and you had a black thumb. So that goes right there to show that anybody can have a garden, especially with this technology. I mean, I've always had a green thumb, but I had some difficulties, with different plants. I'm growing a beautiful one thing I never could grow before, Jim, is and I'm chalking it up to this your technology is a cilantro. I always
Hmm.
had so much trouble with cilantro, but it was I got a new one now and it's thriving. Yeah, it's really doing good. I wish I took a before picture. I wasn't even thinking, but now it's really starting to take off. And cilantro is so good for you. I mean, I was telling you about
Yeah, we
the teas I make, and I put the cilantro in there too.
yeah we had a guy in South Africa who was doing some tests on coriander, which I'm not sure if that's exactly the same plant, but it's very similar to cilantro. Um, and I'm always looking for the before and after, the comparison, right? I want to see like, okay, what does a regular plant look like and what is ours? Because that visual picture is what's so huge doing the comparing one versus the other. And what always seems to happen to me, it's like a catch 22. It's like the control group always dies. Like his control coriander died after like he had to replant it all. So it was about 3 or 4 inches high in the seedlings, and then he replanted both specimens, control and art. Of course, his control plants all died, and then my plants they totally lived. So it's a positive testimonial for me because obviously if his lived and the other ones didn't, well, that's a good result. On the other hand, it's like I want to see, okay, what is the difference in size? What is the difference in yield? What do have that comparative data? And when the control groups always die, like the tomatoes that I mentioned earlier, and this one farmer we had, his control group all died. I'm like, now I can't see what the difference in yield is, except for obviously zero versus what he got with ours. Um, but coriander is one of the things that works really well with our device. Corianders, herbs. I've been using wheatgrass and getting really good results. Just those types of grasses and herbs work especially well, I think, because the entire plant, the entire edible portion of the plant is that leaf, is that part of the plant that's responsible for photosynthesis. So when you energize that, you energize the entire plant, and it just gets much healthier.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm a big sprouter. I sprout inside here, and I have a great little area that gets some sun. And I never seen my sprouts come up so quickly. I was doing broccoli last, and usually, 5 days they're nice and tall, and you can put them on your salads and cut them. But they were growing extremely fast. And I was just setting them in the water. I wasn't even misting them. I was just setting them in the water, and then I'd let it drain. I did that a couple times a day. So it's, yeah, everything I use it on, I'm telling you, it's just amazing. And you're right, my herb garden has never looked better. And I've always had a good herb garden. Yeah, I like to cook and I like to use all these herbs in my cooking. But I've never seen it look this hardy and this strong. And the food too, like the tomatoes that I'm growing and the green peppers, they're more nutritionally dense. I mean, they're even heavier. I can tell they're a heavier fruit. So I can tell
Hmm.
they're even healthier.
Yeah, and I think we'll go into that probably in another episode why that is. I mean that's almost a whole show by itself, but nutrient density is a very important part, especially if you're growing your own food for health purposes, like you're trying to get healthier, um, or maybe you're concerned about the quality of food in supermarkets. That nutrient density is going to be a very important part. Or if you have an illness or something or a condition that you're trying to reverse through natural eating and health, the nutrient density is going to be a very important component to be aware of, in terms of catalyzing that. So we'll go into that in another episode. I guess we have a little more time to explain it, but we've noticed that too in our peppers and tomatoes, that the nutrient density is increased.
Yeah, I just noticed it by just just holding the tomato on the plant. It just feels so heavy, compared to a regular tomato. And it's only half its size. Still has a ways to go. So I'm very excited. Can't wait for harvest here, just
I
to
know.
taste it. And yeah, it's exciting.
Well, we're getting into the point where in Florida here on the outside, I have to figure out what I'm going to plant, because my tomato plants are already fruiting and everything. They're already producing. Same thing with my peppers. But
Hmm.
I've just harvested my cabbage, and I'm trying to figure out what can I plant now that'll survive the heat here in Florida. Um, maybe do some aloe or something else, more of a succulent or a cactus or something. But
Hmm.
I might just try to see how long my tomatoes last versus everybody's got tomatoes in our garden, community garden. So I want to see if my plants last longer, and the other ones start to wilt faster. So that's one thing I want to check out. If mine continue to grow and the rest of them are all dying because it's too hot, then I'll know that my technology is helping the plant. So
There you go. Exactly. Good way to check it out. Well, the music's playing, Jim. It was another great show. I look forward to next Thursday. Thank you so much. And
yeah, thank you for
so,
having me.
yeah, exactly. I love it. And have a wonderful, blessed evening. And for you and your family and your plants, of course. And until next time, God bless.